Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Touring with Travis. My name is Travis Gilbert. I'm the Educator and Collections Coordinator for the Old Baldy Foundation. And behind the camera here, we have our Executive Director, Chris Webb. And we are here at the remains of the old boathouse along the creek and saltwater marsh just north of Bald Head Island. Of course, we lost this historic boathouse due to the effects of Hurricane Florence in the fall of 2018. The boathouse was one of two structures listed on the National Register of Historic Places, the other structure being Old Baldy Lighthouse. So this structure, no one knows for sure when it was constructed. I believe it was 1915 for two reasons. First of all, in 1915 is when the United States government is completing the construction of a new Coast Guard station located on South Beach, near the intersection of South Bald Head Wind and Sea Lavender Court today. That structure, completed in 1915, acted as a new Coast Guard station, replacing the previous structure known as the Life-Saving Service Station, located on East Beach, just north of the modern-day Shoals Club. You can think of the Life-Saving Service as a precursor to the Coast Guard. When the Life-Saving Service and the United States Revenue Cutter Service merged in 1915 to create the Coast Guard as we know it today, they completed that new structure for the Coast Guard along South Beach, and that station served until the late 1930s when it was deactivated, only to be reactivated for a very short time during World War II. So it only makes sense when the government is constructing that new Coast Guard station in 1915, they simultaneously construct a boathouse that is used to deliver men and supplies to that Coast Guard station. You see, it was much easier to use these tidal creeks to float yourself and your supplies inward to the interior of the island rather than hacking your way on foot across land through the jungle of Bald Head Island in order to reach your station. And this location here on the saltwater marsh where the remains of the boathouse are today, this is directly north, a straight line directly north from South Beach where the Coast Guard station was located, again completed in 1915. It's a straight shot south of here from this boathouse. So the Coast Guardsmen would float themselves and their supplies up the tows to this boathouse. They would unload their supplies and head out straight across foot, across land to that southward location where the station was. Now, in addition, the second reason I believe that this was completed in 1915, the only other people that were using this boathouse to float themselves and their supplies to the workplace, to the job here on Bald Head Island, were the lighthouse keepers operating Cape Fear Light Station. That is the lighthouse completed in 1903 near the modern-day Bald Head Island Conservancy. Well, we know through the annual reports of the Lighthouse Board that lighthouse was created by massive amounts of steel and wrought iron. And these supplies were delivered to that lighthouse reservation via a tramway, kind of like a railroad. Think about it. No steam engines, no locomotives. These are being pulled by horses, by various animals, oxen and mule and whatnot. But they are creating a tramway beginning on a pier in the Cape Fear River, 3.5 miles across Bald Head Island to where Turtle Central is today. So if this boathouse was built in 1903, logically they would have been floating those materials to construct Cape Fear Light Station halfway across the island up this saltwater marsh to this location, and you think this is where the railway would begin to ship the rest of those materials via land to the Lighthouse Reservation out there at Turtle Central. But they didn't do that. We know that they built that tramway across the entire length of the island. So it only makes sense that without them talking about the boathouse in 1903, without them floating these supplies to this location, that this boathouse was built later. It was built later than Cape Fear Light Station's construction in 1903. Thus, it only makes sense that it's the second wave of federal construction when they're constructing the Coast Guard station that this boathouse is completed. So I'm going to check in on Facebook and see what's going on. If you're out there listening, give us a shout out in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're listening from, what your connection to Bald Head Island is. If you'd like us to elaborate on something or have any questions, please give us a shout out there. We have, looks like somebody listening from Cleveland, Ohio, or Cleveland, North Carolina. Chuck. Good afternoon, Chuck. It's great to hear from you. Anybody out there, anybody else out there listening, give us a holler. We'd love to hear from you. So again, this boathouse is used to supply the Coast Guard station and also Cape Fear Light Station. Much easier to float yourself nearly halfway across the island and then complete the rest of the way via foot. Anybody knows on this island today, it'd be very difficult to get supplies to each of those federal reservations by hacking your way through the jungle. It's a dense vegetation out here on Bald Head Island, but much easier to float yourself to this location. And this boathouse is where they would have unloaded supplies, but it is also where their bateaus would have been stored. The boathouse was a small, simple structure. There were winches in there, and they could lift their boats out of the water for dry storage. You see, at once upon a time, this boathouse stood in the middle of this creek system. It was above the water. And due to erosion and the southern movement of this creek system, it is now in the middle of what is semi-dry land out there, owned by the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, their Division of State Parks, North Carolina. So once upon a time, again, that boathouse was on top of the water here. Now it is on that dry land over there on state land. Now, one of my favorite things in Bald Head Island history that has happened here at the boathouse is when the eldest daughter of Captain Charlie, or Charles Norton Swan, the principal lightkeeper of Cape Fear Light Station from 1903 to 1933, well, his eldest daughter, Margaret, met her second husband here at the boathouse. And it is, again, one of my favorite stories that occur in this setting. And the only person that can really tell this story and give it justice is Margaret through her own words. She says that they're coming over to the boathouse. That's how they're meeting the Coast Guardsmen, using the Coast Guardsmen and their bateaus in order to get back over to Southport to our west. So her and her sister Geneva are walking here to the boathouse to meet the Coast Guardsmen to take a trip over to Southport. And she looks at her sister when they get here, and she says, "I met this beautiful man." So we go down and we go across the boat. We're going across with the Coast Guard, you see. I got my suitcase and we're all in the boat. And she says to her sister, "Who on earth is that good-looking Coast Guardsman?" She said, "Merle Hood." And I said, "Who in the world is Merle Hood?" See, I'd never heard of hoods in Southport, except the old folks. Her sister tells Margaret that he has a brother stationed over at Fort Caswell where he's a soldier. I said, "Well, I know one thing. He can sure put his shoes under my bed." And she looked at me and she said, "You better get rid of the pair that you've got under there now." So there was two of the Southport boys over there at a beach party at our house. And there was Geneva and Esther and myself and Marie, the Swan family, and then Bessie and Monty Kay over there, and Elsie. So this is back when they've returned to Bald Head Island later that evening. All these girls, all Margaret's sisters and girlfriends, are out at Captain Charlie's station. They're having a little party there. And they all sat down on the front steps after supper. And clearly, they are causing quite a fuss. They're making quite some noise. She says, Papa came out to the window and said, every one of you leave. Get up and go. Go down to Cape Point. Go somewhere. I've got to get my nap before it's time to go on watch duty at midnight. So everybody reached over and got their girl, you know. And Merle reached over and got me. Because there was an extra girl there that he could have gone with, see? And that left Bessie without anybody. So when he reached over and I had looked at him and I thought, boy, man, I could love you. To me, he was so handsome and so much, you know. And when he took a hold of me, the goosebumps popped out on me as big as walnuts. So he said, I got my girl, and gracious day, I thought I'd faint over. We run down the hill, we run down towards Cape Point. We all went down to the Cape and sat on the beach down there. So every time a little come on, Merle would grab my hand, you know. The rest is history. They got married in the 1920s, and they lived here at the Coast Guard station where Merle Hood was stationed for a good while, for many years, until Merle was stationed elsewhere. So Margaret Swan and Merle Hood meet here at the Boathouse, and their relationship is kind of clinched at that party a little bit later on out at Cape Point. Not too different than today. All of us, we love going out and, you know, have a little party or something out there at Cape Point. History is not too dissimilar to what is happening today. And I'm sure there have been hundreds of parties between Margaret and Merle meeting out there than today. So let's see what's going on Facebook there. Hey, Karen Mortimer. Hi, Travis, watching again today. Hey, Karen, it's good to hear from you. And Kara, good afternoon. Looks like much better weather today. Kara, much better weather today. It was night and day between yesterday and today. So the Coast Guard station was deactivated, like I said, in the late 30s, about the time that Merle and Margaret are moved elsewhere. And it was reactivated during World War II. We have many pictures of the Coast Guardsmen during World War II unloading supplies here at the Boathouse. But following the conclusion of World War II, the Coast Guard ceased operations at that station. And then about a decade or so later, in 1958, they ceased operations at Cape Fear Light Station in favor of Oak Island. So this boathouse is abandoned, at least for federal purposes, by 1958, not in use anymore. Now, we know throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s, even into the 80s, that this boathouse is used recreationally. It is used by various members of the Generator Society to access this island. It's used for crab pots. We know in the Generator Society folks, they love to come out here and launch crab pots off of the boathouse. We know that even before the Generator Society, when people are coming over from Southport for day trips, that this is used to access the island. But slowly but surely, year after year, this creek system is moving and meandering southward towards me, making the boathouse unable to be used for recreational purposes for a boat. So, unfortunately, it was lost due to the effects of Hurricane Florence in 2018. Again, it is owned by the state of North Carolina. It is on state land. So, unfortunately, there were lots of endeavors to save this structure, but they all just could not get past the state bureaucracy. And we were looking forward to a solution from the state in order to save perhaps what is left of the boathouse and repurpose the wood for maybe perhaps a new exhibit or for some other adaptive reuse purposes. Again, looking for a solution from the state on the remains of this boathouse structure. See, Kara, I think In These Own Word stories are my favorites. I agree, absolutely, Kara. And Kathy Gilbert, good afternoon. It's still cold in PA. Freeze warnings tonight, so enjoy your sunny weather. Well, we will enjoy our sunny weather, absolutely. When you join that board meeting today, be sure to tell them what a valuable service you're providing. Thank you. Dan and Emmeline, very, very kind to you, very kind words. I appreciate that, y'all.
Do you have the comment from Cheryl Atkinson?
I do not.
I appreciate all the history that you have shared during the tours.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Cheryl, it is our pleasure, very much so. We enjoy it, keeping us a little bit sane out here while we, socially distance and work on finding how we're going to move forward from this quarantine, that's for sure. So the Boathouse, although it's gone and it has not been really having an official purpose since 1958, it has taken on quite a legacy. It is arguably one of the most photographed and painted structures on Bald Head Island. That includes Old Baldy. You can just, Google the Old Boathouse, Bald Head Island, and find so many photographs, so many paintings of this structure. People really seemed attracted to it when it was standing. It kind of represented one of the figureheads of what was on Bald Head Island, the history, the deep maritime culture, and the various federal employees that served here on the island and used this boathouse as a funnel to the outside world. This was the front door. This was the front porch of Bald Head Island for these federal employees working on Bald Head Island in the 20th century. It's how they accessed the outside world. It's how they got supplies. It's how they got information, letters from home. It's how they were ferried back and forth from Southport. So again, I think we can all think of this as kind of the front door to Bald Head Island in the early 20th century. A legacy that is continued through the artwork and the photography that is kind of all over on the island. Check back here on Facebook and see. Melanie, are there any alligators in the water behind you? I've always had second thoughts kayaking when we rented out there. Has the boathouse been looted or folks are pretty reverent? Well, first of all, this is salt water, so alligators tend not to tolerate salt water. I guess that there is a chance there could be alligators.
They have been spotted.
They have been spotted.
Rare, but spotted.
Just as the alligators, like on the beaches, have every now and then you'll get a report of an alligator on the beach. But no, this is not their natural habitat, so it would be very rare to see an alligator. Again, it's salt water, and alligators need fresh water. That's why they're in the lagoons around the golf course. And has there been any looting, or folks pretty reverent? I think that there has been some looting. Certainly there was looting even before it was destroyed. This is not something new. Certainly there was pillaging going on before it was destroyed by Hurricane Florence. Certainly that is still occurring afterwards. But I think that most folks on Bald Head Island are very reverent about the boathouse, and they would like to see this wood adaptively reused for educational and interpretive purposes. And we surely hope the state concurs in that opinion, and we are awaiting a solution from them on what is their property and what is this very valuable piece of cultural resource that unfortunately sits there in a lump for going on a year and a half, almost 2 years. Chris and I might have been one of the first people to see it with our own eyes that day. It was like September 28th or something. We were out here after Hurricane Florence. It took us about 2 weeks to get out here, and we came over here and saw it for our own eyes, got some pictures, and it was a very, very sad day for all of us. Now, it will never be taken off the National Register of Historic Places. We looked into that. We had a happy hour. Virtually some of you may have joined us for that happy hour. There was a question brought up. First of all, can things, once they're destroyed, do they get removed from the National Register of Historic Places? That is, in fact, not the case. This will always be on the National Register, even though it has been lost. The second half was, Are there structures that have been placed on the National Register of Historic Places that no longer exist? And the answer to that question was kind of twofold. No, a structure that has been lost cannot be placed on the National Register, but the landscape around a structure that has been lost can be placed on the National Register. So in a roundabout way, things can be placed, and this will always be designated, again, on the National Register of Historic Places, one of only 2 structures on this entire island, chock full of history, that has that very important and valuable designation. So if there aren't any other questions, we're going to leave you for this afternoon. Again, tomorrow we have a treat for you all. Don Taylor, whose grandfather would have been using this boathouse to access his job as an assistant lightkeeper out at Cape Fear Light Station. She's going to be joining us tomorrow at 10 o'clock for an interview about her grandfather's operations and legacy here on Baldy Island as, again, an assistant keeper at Cape Fear Light Station. And in the afternoon, we'll be bringing you another little slice of Baldy Island and what is going to be proved a very wonderful and beautiful day, such as today. So we're looking forward to y'all joining us tomorrow for another day jam-packed full of virtual programming. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. You all stay safe and you stay healthy and happy out there, because this will all be over in time. All be over very soon.